Oh boy, you had better buckle up. Chapter 10, Lesson 2 is all about the parts of the cell, and there is so much to cover. We have to be able to describe what all of this is. Each one of these little unmarked lines that's pointing to something, we have to know what they are, so let's get to it. So, we're focusing on cells, and I need you to think of cells as being like houses. Houses come in a wide variety of shapes, sizes, and layouts. Some houses may have parts or rooms that other houses may not have. For example, not every house has a basement, or not every house has a game room, or not every house has a attic, something like that. Okay? But every house usually does have the same basic parts. Every house or apartment will have a kitchen, and they will have a bedroom. They will have a bathroom, things like that. And each one of those rooms does have a particular function or job. Well, cells are going to be like this. You're going to have cells that are very specialized, and they're going to have parts that other cells are not going to have. And all cells are going to have the same basic parts. Inside a human body, there are all kinds of different cells. As you can see, there are nerve cells and muscle cells and bone cells and blood cells. They all have different jobs to do, and so they all have different shapes and different sizes, and they're going to have different parts inside to make them specialized. However, all of these cells are going to have the same basic parts, and that's what we are going to be covering today. Now, a big sixth grade thing is how cells, where they fit into everything else that we've been studying. So when cells work together, and here we have a picture of a group of very similar types of cells. These are actually all stomach cells. And when cells are connected to each other and they're all the same type of cell, that is called a tissue. So cells work together to make tissue. If you get enough tissue together, you can make an organ. For example, the brain here is made out of brain cells. A chunk of brain is just called brain tissue, but the entire brain is called an organ. The spinal cord is going to be made out of nerve cells, and they're going to be working together. A part of a spinal cord is called tissue, but the entire spinal cord is called an organ. And we could do the same thing for the lungs and the stomach and the large and the small intestines. Cells make tissue, which is like a chunk of the organ, and the organ is the entire structure itself. If you get a couple of organs all working together, you can make an organ system. So on the left, we have the nervous system. It's the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves all working together. So we have several different organs working together to make one organ system. Now, one organ system by itself can't sustain life. You need several organ systems working together. So in the middle, we have our digestive system with the stomach and the liver and the intestines and other parts. That's our digestive system. And over on the right, we have what's called the respiratory system. And that is your lungs, your trachea, nasal cavity, things like that. If you get enough of these systems working together, and these are just three of many, then you can create what's called an organism. So an organism is made out of organ systems, which are made out of organs, which are made out of tissues, which are made out of cells. But that's not it. We can actually go all the way back to what we learned in the first quarter and put it all together. So at the very beginning, right here, we've got atoms, and atoms make up everything. Atoms, in order to make new and different substances, connect together to make molecules. So there's our step right there. Molecules and compounds work together to make something that we're going to be learning about today called an organelle, a little baby organ inside a cell. So we've got atoms making molecules, molecules working together and stacking together to make organelles. If you get enough organelles together, now you can have a cell. Get a group of cells together and you've got tissue. Get enough tissue together and you can make an entire organ. Get enough organs together, you can make an organ system. And then if you get enough organ systems working together, you can make an organism. Now, the rest of this chart, population, community, ecosystem, ecosphere, that's all for 7th grade. Their job is to build off of what we learn here. So your job this year is to be able to describe how we get from atoms to organisms. And it's atoms make molecules, molecules make organelles, organelles make cells, cells make tissues, tissues make organs, organs make organ systems, and organ systems make organisms. Okay, cells are going to kind of mimic this. Cells, just like you are made out of specialized parts, also are made out of specialized parts. We are made up of parts called organs. Cells are made up of little parts called organelles. The suffix "els" just means small or little. So these are like tiny little organs inside a cell. So you, as you can see on the left, are made up of specialized parts. Each of them has a job. Cells are made up out of specialized parts, and each of them has a job. And our job in 6th grade is to learn all of these parts. So the first definition we need to get out of control or under control is the word cell. The cell is the smallest unit of an organism that can carry on life functions. There are obviously things smaller than a cell, but those by themselves cannot carry on life functions. You need all of them working together to make a cell, and only the cell can carry on life functions, nothing smaller. Organelle is a structure in the cytoplasm of a eukaryotic cell that can act as a storage site, process energy, move materials, or manufacture substances. So we need to cover what cytoplasm and eukaryotic cell is, and then we can go on to the other bits. Okay. Before we do that, we have a couple of pieces of background information to give you. The first is the word membrane. It's got a big fancy definition. It's a layer of material which serves as a selective barrier between two phases and remains impermeable to specific particles or groups of particles or substances. Now, if we break this down, layer of material, that's pretty easy, which serves as a selective barrier. The word barrier means something that will stop something from moving. A selective barrier is a barrier that picks and chooses what gets through and what gets blocked. And the between two phases just basically means between two sides. And to remain impermeable means it's not going to allow certain things through. So I need you to think of membranes as these two guys in the red polo shirts that look mean. Okay, they're called bouncers. They are in charge of controlling who gets in and out of whatever this establishment is. The job of the bouncer is to check over whatever wants to get in and make sure that they are on the approved list. If they're on the approved list, these bouncers, or in our case for a cell, membranes, will allow them in. And if they're not, they don't allow them in. So over here on the left, we've got several different types of particles. We've got the triangles, the plus signs, and the little spiky things. Only the spiky things are allowed through. So the job of a membrane is to allow what belongs in to get through, but anything else that doesn't belong cannot get through. The other word we need to know is the word bound. The word bound means wrapped up, tied up, something like that. This lady is bound. She's been tied up, okay? So there are two types of cells that we're going to start off with. They have the fancy words of prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Prokaryotic cells do not have a nucleus. They have no membrane-bound organelles. So they have no tiny parts inside that are wrapped in a little membrane of their own. And they are for very simple life forms like bacteria. Eukaryotic cells, on the other hand, are instantly recognized by having a nucleus, and they also have membrane-bound organelles. They have organelles that are wrapped in their own membrane for their own protection. And these are for complicated life forms like carrots. So here we have a basic prokaryotic cell. There's not a lot going on. It has one big membrane around the outside. That's this pink layer. And inside, it's filled with some DNA, which is this black squiggly thing. And then tiny little dots called ribosomes that we'll get to later. But this is it. This is the cell. The prokaryotic cells don't have a lot going on. Just DNA, and they're protected by one big cell membrane, but they have no membrane-bound organelles. So this is what most bacteria kind of looks like. That's it. A fancy prokaryotic cell will have some way of moving. So here we have these little tails called flagellum, or these tiny little hairs that kind of help them swim. But other than that, inside, we're going to have some DNA, we're going to have some ribosomes, and that's it. There's nothing else to this organism. So here we have a prokaryotic cell. It's been stained or dyed so that we can see things better under the microscope. But this is the entire organism. It's only one cell big, and it's got this membrane around the outside. We've got this DNA in the middle, and then all these darker areas are just ribosomes, which again we'll cover later. Now what I'm going to do is show you a prokaryotic cell next to a eukaryotic cell. So this prokaryotic cell is going to move to the left, and you'll see the eukaryotic cell on the right. There you go. It is definitely a lot more complex. We've got membrane-bound structures inside. This is for a much more complicated life form. So eukaryotic is on the right, eukaryotics on the right, and prokaryotics on the left. Eukaryotics are very complex. They have membrane-bound organelles, and here's the very recognizable nucleus. And prokaryotics are very, very simple. Not a lot going on. Okay, so eukaryotic cells have all of these membrane-bound organelles. Our job is to be able to recognize them. And that means we have to do this in two parts. The first phase is just learning how to recognize the various structures or organelles in any cell. You can think of this as like a map quiz for cells. So the first quiz that we are going to have, at least for me, Mr. Bogdan, is just going to be like a map quiz. I'm going to bring up a picture of a eukaryotic cell, and I'm going to ask you which parts are which. All you have to do is name them. Phase 2 is our second week of this part of the book, and that is to actually know the jobs of each of these parts. So let's start off with the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm you can recognize on a diagram as having an arrow that's kind of pointing at nothing inside the cell. It's just the fluid that fills the cell. So that's its job is to fill the cell. It's kind of like a water balloon. So the cytoplasm is a thick jelly-like water. It's like a thick water that fills the cell and helps fill it up like a balloon. The other job of the cytoplasm is for organelles and materials to kind of swim through the cytoplasm. Okay, so you recognize it by the arrows pointing at kind of nothing. So here we have, if you look at the bottom of the diagram where I've circled in red the word cytoplasm, and you can see in this diagram, it's pointing to that big empty space in the middle. Okay, it's not pointing to anything. So that's the cytoplasm. It's the water or jelly-like water that fills the cell. In this diagram, you can see this arrow is pointing at just nothing in particular, just the stuff in the middle of the cell. So that's the cytoplasm. And in this diagram, number 14, that I've circled in red in the top left, is pointing at just the nothingness in between all the other parts. And so that is the cytoplasm. It's just the fluid that fills the cell. The nucleus is the next thing that we have to recognize. It is usually the largest structure in most cells. We'll see later on that it's not always. Good diagrams will have kind of an inner core for the nucleus. And good diagrams will also have DNA inside. The job of the nucleus is to control everything. So think of it as like the brain of the cell. It's going to control all the activities of the cell, and it's got its own membrane to help protect the DNA and keep the DNA from getting damaged at all. Okay. So if we look at this cell, or we're going to see these diagrams again and again. The nucleus is this big structure in the middle of the cell. We can see it's got a core that we will discuss in just a little bit. And these little strings, they've labeled as chromatin. These are the DNA. So this very, very large structure in the middle is the nucleus. Here we can see in this diagram with this very, very large structure, that's the nucleus. And this inner area, we will get to in just a minute. And in this diagram, all of this is number 6, but all of this is the nucleus. The outside is its membrane. The inside is the part that's coming up very, very soon. That's the core. Okay, but this area here is the nucleus. Okay. The core inside the nucleus is something called the nucleolus. All right, nucleolus. The job of the nucleolus is to make another part of the cell that you're going to see called the ribosomes. So the nucleus controls all the activities of the cell and protects the DNA. Inside the nucleus is the nucleolus, and its job is to make ribosomes. So here we have that core, the nucleolus. There's the nucleolus inside the nucleus. And number 5 in this case is the core, the nucleolus, and its job is to make the ribosomes, which we'll show you in just a little bit. All right, so speaking of ribosomes, you can find them on any diagram by looking at the smallest, tiniest little dots. They are found in the cytoplasm, the fluid that fills the cell, and they're also on another structure called the rough endoplasmic reticulum, or rough ER. The job of the ribosomes is to make proteins. So if you, hopefully you've heard the word proteins before, whether you eat a certain food because it's high in protein or something like that. Okay, well, proteins are made by cells, and it is the ribosomes inside a cell that make proteins. Because ribosomes are found in 2 different places in a cell, they often have 2 different types of proteins. So ribosomes that are in the cytoplasm make proteins that are used for construction. Okay, the cell needs to be built out of parts. Proteins are good for building cell parts, and so ribosomes that are in the cytoplasm tend to make proteins that are good for construction. Ribosomes that are found on the rough ER make proteins that eventually become something called enzymes. So here we have our animal cell, and we can find ribosomes in 2 different parts. First of all, here we have them labeled, these tiny little dots that you see all scattered throughout the cytoplasm. You can always find them on a diagram by being the smallest, tiniest little dots. So ribosomes, not ribosomes. I hate when 6th graders say ribosomes. Ribosomes are these tiny little dots in the cytoplasm, but also on this structure here that I've circled, you can see the same tiny little dots kind of covering this structure called the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, so the ribosomes that are here in the cytoplasm, they're going to make construction proteins. And the ribosomes on the rough ER here are going to make proteins that become enzymes. All right. This diagram has ribosomes both in the cytoplasm. We've got some up here, we've got some down here, and we've got some here on the rough ER. Here we have, looks like number 12 is pointing to ribosomes both on the rough ER and on floating around in the cytoplasm. Okay, so the endoplasmic reticulum. You can recognize the rough endoplasmic reticulum or the smooth endoplasmic reticulum by being stacks of membranes attached to the nucleus. So if you find the nucleus, usually, not usually, always, if it's a good diagram, right next to it is the endoplasmic reticulum. Diagrams will have part of it as smooth. They're not going to be covered in ribosomes. And part of it is going to be the rough ER, and it has ribosomes on it. The rough ER has the job of making proteins that become enzymes, and enzymes cause chemical reactions. So inside a cell, you need a lot of chemical reactions to take place. It's enzymes, which are a type of protein, that do that, and it's the rough ER that makes those. The smooth ER is going to make fats, cholesterols, other lipids. So here we have in this diagram both the smooth and the rough ER. If you look at the smooth, you can see that it does not have ribosomes on it, and the smooth ER is going to make fats and lipids, and the rough ER is going to make proteins that become enzymes. But as you can see, the ER, the endoplasmic reticulum, is right here next to the nucleus where it belongs. On this diagram, it doesn't have a spot for a label. There's no arrow pointing to it, but it is where it's supposed to be. Right here next to the nucleus is the smooth and rough ER. Here's the rough with its ribosomes, and down here is the smooth without ribosomes. This diagram has the ER. This one looks like the rough ER, and it's right next to the nucleus where it belongs. But this diagram is missing the smooth ER. Not sure why. Maybe this is it over here, and if it is, it's a terrible diagram because it should be over here next to the nucleus. So not all diagrams you are going to see are going to be fantastic. Your job is to kind of critique them. Okay. The next one we have to learn is called the Golgi Apparatus. You can recognize it by being similar to the endoplasmic reticulum because it's a stack of membranes, but it's not attached to the nucleus. A lot of my students say it looks kind of like a Wi-Fi symbol sometimes. The good diagrams are going to have something called vesicles that are transporting materials between the endoplasmic reticulum and the Golgi apparatus. The Golgi apparatus is called the post office of the cell. Its job is to receive something, mark it for shipment, and then wrap it up and package it, and then ship it off someplace. So it's going to take proteins from the rough ER, and it's going to modify them. It's going to change them to make enzymes. So enzymes, as we said earlier, cause chemical reactions. The Golgi apparatus then ships these vesicles around the cell or out of the cell. So here we have the Golgi apparatus. As you can see, it's a stack of membranes, kind of similar to the ER, but it's not attached to the nucleus. It's away from the nucleus. Okay. These tiny little purple circles that are detached are your vesicles. Here we have the Golgi apparatus. Again, the ER is attached to the nucleus. The Golgi apparatus is not attached to the nucleus. And as you can see, there's these tiny little packages or vesicles that are in between the ER and the Golgi apparatus. Here we have the stack of membranes away from the nucleus. So number 13 in this case is my Golgi apparatus. And it looks like number 15 here are my vesicles. So again, we have the nucleus and the ER attached to the nucleus. The vesicle takes what the ER makes, packages it to protect it in a membrane, and ships it to the Golgi. The Golgi is going to modify or change whatever's inside the vesicle and then repackage it, and then it can ship it to some other place in the cell or, as you can see in this diagram, out of the cell. Here's another diagram showing the same thing. We've got the nucleus, the ER right next to it, rough with the ribosomes, smooth without the ribosomes. A vesicle is transporting something that the ER made, and it goes into one end of the Golgi and then comes out of the other end, having been changed in some way. And then this new vesicle can either go to someplace else inside the cell, or it can carry the newly made substance and then shove it out of the cell. Okay, mitochondria. The mitochondria is easily recognizable because it looks like a bean and it's got a maze inside. Its job is to break down food, usually sugar, and turn that into energy for the cell. So yeah, you recognize it by it being a bean with a maze inside. So mitochondria, it looks like a bean and it looks like it's got a maze inside. And it's got there's another mitochondria over here. It looks like a bean and it's got a maze inside. Okay. Bean, maze inside, bean, 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 both of them with mazes inside. Oh, look, a bean with a maze inside. And here's another one down here. So these are your mitochondria. Lysosomes are small to medium circles. That's how you recognize them. They're larger than ribosomes because ribosomes are always the smallest. And they're also usually larger than vesicles. They are usually round, and similarly sized vacuoles, which is another structure, are often irregularly shaped. So I'll show you a diagram that has vacuoles and lysosomes. Lysosomes are circular, vacuoles are irregularly shaped. The job of a lysosome is to carry digestive chemicals or enzymes. These enzymes or digestive chemicals break down worn out organelles, waste, or something that the cell is trying to kill. For example, your white blood cells have the job of killing bacteria and viruses that are in your body. And so the cell will bring in whatever it's trying to kill, and then the lysosomes attach to it and then spill out their digestive juices and enzymes and start killing whatever it is that the cell wants to kill. Okay. So in this diagram, we can see the lysosomes are round. They have particles inside that are your digestive compounds. They are definitely larger than the ribosomes and larger than the vesicles. All right, so here's a diagram that shows vesicles and something later that we'll talk about called vacuoles. Lysosomes are your round ones. Vacuoles are your irregularly shaped ones, the ones that aren't round. And then be careful of this one. It's got little spikes on it that we'll talk about in just a little bit. All right, so here we are. It's larger than a vesicle and definitely larger than a ribosome. All right. Vacuoles come in different sizes. In a plant cell, it's either the same size or can actually be the only thing larger than the nucleus. In an animal cell, it's about the same size as a lysosome, but it's irregularly shaped. The job of a vacuole is to store stuff. It usually stores water or nutrients or anything else the cell just wants to kind of hold on to. It's kind of like a closet or a cellar for a cell. Okay. For plant cells, a vacuole can actually grow and shrink, and that can actually change the shape of the cell. It can actually help plants kind of like bend towards sunlight. Okay. All right. So in this diagram, there are no vacuoles. Many animal cells do not have vacuoles. So a lot of times you won't see them. If you do see them, they will be medium sized like this, and they will be irregularly shaped. This diagram does not seem to have vacuoles because it's an animal cell. And here we have a plant cell. And as you can see, here's the nucleus and the endoplasmic reticulum that's kind of wrapped around it. And this is how big the vacuole can be. So in a plant cell, it's often called the large central vacuole because it's very, very large. It's bigger than the nucleus. And in this diagram here, we can see that this much larger structure is a vacuole. So here we've got the nucleus, the nucleolus, the endoplasmic reticulum that's attached to the nucleus, and then the very large vacuole. So plant cells and animal cells, very, very different. The chloroplast is going to be similar in size and shape to the mitochondria. So to recognize a chloroplast, it's going to be very similar to a mitochondria, but it's going to have stacks inside. It looks like a bunch of things stacked on top of each other instead of a maze. So a mitochondria has a maze and a chloroplast has stacks inside. Chloroplasts are only found in plant cells. So when we look at diagrams in just a second, we are not going to see them in animal cells. Okay? The job of the chloroplast is to do photosynthesis. It's going to take sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water and turn them all into sugar. So here we have just a chloroplast, and this is what I mean by stacks inside. It looks like a bunch of things stacked on top of each other. We don't have to know what they are, just know that they look like stacks, okay? So when you compare a chloroplast and a mitochondria, about the same size, about the same shape, mitochondria has this maze inside, and chloroplasts have these stacks inside. So in an animal cell, we've got the bean with the maze inside. That's a mitochondria, but we don't see any chloroplasts because animals don't have chloroplasts. Another animal cell and no chloroplasts. And another animal cell and no chloroplasts. Here we have a plant cell finally. So here's a mitochondria and here is a chloroplast. So mitochondria has got the maze and chloroplast has got things stacked on top of each other. Again, looks like things stacked on top of each other. So mitochondria has got the maze and chloroplast has got the stacks. All right. The centrioles are only in animal cells, so we won't see them in plant cells. And I didn't have a good way of describing it, so I just showed you the picture. All right. The DNA needs to be moved around whenever a cell copies itself. And so the job of the centriole is to move DNA around. So out of these tubes come long, sticky threads, and that's for another lesson. All right, so here we have an animal cell, and there they are. They're often in pairs, not always, but they're often drawn in pairs like this. Okay? This is the little spiky thing I told you to watch out for. That, I'm guessing they were trying to make centrioles. And right there, they're kind of in pairs. Animal cells have them. Plant cells do not, so we won't find them in plant cells at all. All right, we're almost there. The cytoskeleton or microtubules. These are long, thin rods that are not in the nucleus. That's how you recognize them. And their job is to either keep or change the shape of the cell. So here we've got these tiny little rods that are outside the nucleus. So inside the nucleus, we'll have these long strings, and these are your DNA. Outside are these microtubules or cytoskeleton. And the cells will use these to kind of either keep their shape or rearrange them to change their shape. Imagine if you were able to rearrange the bones in your body to take on a new shape. It'd be fun. Good at parties. The animal cell here does not look like they have them. Here we've actually got two different sizes. So number 2 and number 8 are your microtubules and your cytoskeleton. The smaller ones, I believe, are cytoskeleton, and the larger ones are microtubules. This one has the microtubules kind of stored in the large central vacuole. And then we kind of got them kind of just scattered around. That's it. Okay, that's all. Well, actually, there's a lot more to cells, but this is just the 6th grade version. It actually gets way more complicated than this. Who knew that something so small could be so complex? Okay. Thank you for making it this far. You've now been introduced to the parts of the cell, how to recognize them, and how to start to talk about what their jobs are. Go get them.